The Hebrew story continues with Moses receiving the revelation on Sinai, which was supposed to redeem the world, but it doesn't. Here's what happened. As Moses receives the Torah, the law of God, the people build the golden calf. God's hopes are frustrated yet again, for he has been betrayed. So just try to imagine this. Moses descends from the mountain carrying 2 tablets. He's carrying God's law, described in Exodus 31 as written with the finger of God. Moses sees the people worshiping the false gods, being foolish, just acting out, being obscene in many ways. And what does he do? He's holding the law of God, his 2 tablets, and he smashes the tablets. Just breaks them in a million pieces. And then in Exodus 34, we read, Moses carved 2 tablets like the first. So what happened? The ancient rabbinic commentary called the Midrash interprets this as God saying to Moses, look, I wrote the first set of tablets, as it says, written with the finger of God. But now that you broke it, you write the second set of tablets. I'll kibitz a little bit from the side, but you go ahead and write it. And it's fascinating really to contemplate why Moses broke the tablets in the first place. If you could put yourself in his place, here he comes carrying the law of God, and he sees his people acting up. And either he gets so angry that he says, I'm going to show them a thing or two. And he just breaks the tablets. Or, and here's the other interpretation, did he break the tablets because he knew, somehow, intuitively, he felt it, that humanity was simply not in a position, they weren't able to receive these pure laws of God. He came down and he looked at these people, they're worshiping this golden calf, and he saw that they were immersed in sin and corruption. And God's law, so pure and spiritual, had no place in this kind of a world. So Moses, with a little help from God, writes the second set of tablets for an unredeemed world. The divine plan for the world is compromised. Moses was upset too when this happened. So the Torah, as is written by Moses, now speaks to an imperfect world. The Torah originally was meant for a world of peace governed by justice and compassion. And instead, we're now in a world that deals with violence, war, murder, crime, deception, sin, all the features of human existence so manifest in our world today. And thus we have God's laws not for a perfect world, but for a messy world. So that brings us back to justice. Is it just an ideal? In the real world, as we know it and live it, exploitation abounds. Self-interest has no or little self-regulation. Governmental efforts to impose regulations to limit individual prosperity have grown threadbare. The labor movement's mission, essentially, has been to restrain the abuse of unequal power. In fact, all movements, great social movements, have been of that kind, to restrain the abuse of unequal power. Leave a little bit of the pie for others, but all that's left of the pie now are a few crumbs. Transforming the economic order has not only been the goal of labor, but has captured the theological imagination as well. Creating a perfect world indeed lies beyond our grasp, but we are called to pursue justice nonetheless. It remains our task as religious beings. Theologians calling to transform the economic order began with alternatives to capitalism. Emil Brunner argued in 1932 in his book, The Divine Imperative, that capitalism is, and I quote, contrary to the spirit of service. It is debased and irresponsible. Indeed, we may go further and say it is irresponsibility developed into a system. Obama's presidency from the get-go has sought to break the existing concentrations of economic power. Banks, Wall Street, oil, healthcare, insurance, corporations, all examples of a privileged class acting irresponsibly. But executives of multinational corporations say, welcome to the real world. This is how it works. It's no utopia. The real world, as it is getting increasingly defined, directs its energies towards wealth creation while allowing the markets to take care of distribution. What is called into question, I think, is democracy itself. Is not democracy about equal opportunities for all, with concerns expressed for our neighbors who may be faring more poorly? But the upper echelons of our societal fabric insist that economic power is not to be confused with democracy. Democracy now accepts the hegemony of corporate capitalism. Greed does not diminish democracy. My goodness, corporations even have been given the status of people. So theologians like Brunner and Tillich and Barth refer to themselves as social democrats. Democracy was still so important, so inherent in their beliefs. Democracy, they maintained, was about justice and attaining an egalitarian system. The emphasis, the reality that they're looking at, is the communal, not individual prosperity. But even raising the specter of justice as a divine mandate cannot override our nation's unfounded fear that any aspect of socialism or redistribution of wealth smacks of a totalitarian government overreach and moral squalor. Reagan's signature piece, The Welfare Queen, represents the sloth of an undeserving demographic. Therefore, we have no obligations to the poor, and the response to the prophetic call gets dismissed with the argument that the prophets and Jesus himself were too idealistic. Justice and compassion are relegated to idealistic visions. Justice feels divorced from how the real world works. And so what are we to make of justice? There's not a day that goes by when we're not reminded of the growing hopelessness around inequality. The need to restrain the abuse of unequal power is glaring. From the coal mines of West Virginia, to the garment workers in Bangladesh, to those denied Medicaid here in our own backyard. But oddly, we in this congregation, who easily dismiss religion as superstition and argue for a just world through rational persuasion, must recognize nevertheless that the ideal we pursue is holy work. Our cultural stories, embedded in Scripture, inform us that that which stirs our hearts and moves us to focus so intently on social justice stems from our natural, intuitive sense of the divine. It all began with a vision of justice in a perfect world. It didn't quite turn out that way. And every artist knows that the end result is a long way off from how it was first envisioned. But we have caught glimpses of what the world could look like. And we are the custodians of those transcendent values that were initially intended for humankind. We are committed to keeping these sacred values alive. We cannot live as though love were a sham and compassion a meaningless joke. Our task is to practice these virtues and convey them to a world whose very survival, we feel, depends on them. So yeah, we understand it now. It's written in Scripture. Rationally, it makes sense. We cannot make the world perfect. Right? We know that. But the pursuit of a just and perfect world remains our religious work. And when our spirits flag, as they are wont to do, this congregation inspires and keeps us going for one reason only, because we must.